average investor that says, I've got a certain amount of resources, you know, everything that you're saying makes me very fearful of the future and what might happen. Staying in cash doesn't make sense because what you're describing, it's going to get inflated so bad that these dollars aren't going to be worth much.
Well, exactly. You have to understand, what Americans have to understand is government isn't free, right? So when we pass a $2 trillion stimulus bill with no tax increases to cover the costs, or the government doesn't cut spending in other parts of the budget, like let's say the government said, hey, we need some domestic stimulus, so we're going to cut the defense budget. And we're going to take the money that we're not spending on the military and we're going to use that for these domestic programs. But that's not what they're doing, right? In fact, we're increasing the defense budget at the same time that we're increasing spending dramatically on non-defense. So somebody's got to pay for this. Now, we can pretend that the rich are going to pay for it, you know, with tax hikes. It's not even going to come close. Yes, the rich may pay more taxes. They may not. You know, who knows, because they may alter their behavior to avoid these higher tax rates, and it could actually result in lower tax revenue to the U.S. government despite the higher rates.
Right.
But even if they do get some extra revenue, the revenue they get will pale in comparison to the money they're spending. So where is the government getting this money? Well, the Federal Reserve is going to print it. Well, that doesn't mean it's free. And so the way this process works, under normal taxation, right, the government takes your money, right? They have an income tax or a property tax or a sales tax, and money goes directly from you to the government. Now you can't spend the money because the government took it. And now they give it to somebody else who spends it, right? And that's how taxation works. Well, what if the government just gives money to somebody else, but they don't take any money from me? That doesn't mean I'm not worse off. Because what happens is when the government prints money and gives it to somebody else who didn't earn it and who didn't produce anything to get it, that person now can spend that money the same as somebody else who did earn it and did produce stuff. So now that person that got this government money that was just printed goes into the marketplace and starts buying stuff. Well, that means prices are going to go up for the stuff that they're buying. And assuming we're buying the same types of things, now I'm going to have to pay a higher price because more people have money to buy those goods and services. And so what actually happens is the government has taken my purchasing power. So because prices have gone up, I can't buy as much stuff. So it's basically the same outcome. If the government taxes me and takes 10% of my money, right, well, then I can only buy 90% of what I could have bought had they left me with all my money. Well, if the government doesn't take my money, but prints money and gives it to my neighbor, and because my neighbor starts buying stuff, the price of everything goes up 10%, right? Well, now I'm buying less in the same proportion than if the government had taken the money from me. So inflation is a tax. It's just a tax that most people don't realize that is a tax because they just think they're paying higher prices. But the reason they're paying higher prices is because the government printed money and gave it to somebody to spend, and so they took my purchasing power. So the inflation tax is going to be devastating because prices are going to surge. So what you need to do is avoid that tax by avoid owning dollars and dollar-denominated financial assets. So you got to sell your dollars and get into foreign currencies by owning foreign assets denominated in those currencies where they pay dividends of those currencies. And then you want to own real things, commodities, resources, businesses, not paper. And I think outside the United States is going to where you're going to get by far the best investment returns and escape to the greatest degree possible this inflation tax.
Do you think that the United States is the most irresponsible economically, which is why you'd go outside of it? In other words, are other countries being a little bit more rational in their approach?
Well, I wouldn't say we're the most irresponsible. I mean, we're certainly one of the most, but we're not the most. Yes, which is why I'm selective when I go abroad, right? I'm not trying to jump out of the frying pan into the fire. So it's just not, we have to look at all the various countries and you can assess their positions.
Are there any that you feel good about right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, no country is pursuing the correct policy because everybody has interest rates too low. Everybody's printing too much money. So that's not something that's unique to America. But I think we are the driving force behind that because the dollar is the reserve currency. And so kind of we export our bad monetary policy to the rest of the world. I think when the dollar is rejected and is no longer the reserve currency, then sounder monetary policies will ensue in other countries. But really what I look at is countries that have trade surpluses, not deficits, countries that governments, the budgets are relatively in balance, or if they have deficits, they're not chronic. Maybe they have deficits now due to COVID, but they haven't historically run deficits. Their budgets have been balanced or they have surpluses. I like countries that have relatively low tax rates too, which means if they have no deficits and low tax rates, that means government spending must also be relatively low. Countries that have fewer regulations, that don't interfere as much in the capital markets, in the labor markets, right? So you have more economic freedom, and that generally means more prosperity and better returns for investors. But I mean, the main problem though with the US is that the US is not really held to the same standard as other nations that act recklessly, because the market ultimately brings an end to that behavior because their currency drops, prices go up, interest rates go up, and the market forces a reform in order to avoid an even worse crisis. But we have been exempt from that because of the dollar's role as a reserve currency, so we're not held in check with the same type of external disciplines that a lot of other countries have. As a result of that, we've gotten away with it for so long, and therefore the underlying imbalances have gotten much greater than they otherwise would have grown to had we had to deal with the problem earlier, because market forces forced our hand. But those market forces are not going to be kept at bay indefinitely, right? We're going to have to deal with it. And because we succeeded in kicking the can down the road for as long as we did, it's going to be so much worse when we can't kick it anymore.
What are your thoughts around gold and other precious metals? Is that a good place to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I think gold, silver, even more so than gold right now, really do not reflect the degree to which inflation is going to ravage the typical investor in his portfolio. I think you still have a lot of confidence, for whatever reason is beyond me, in the Fed and their ability to forecast the economy and their ability to fight off inflation and to make sure it doesn't become a problem. I mean, the Fed has no ability. I mean, even if they thought an inflation problem was brewing, they wouldn't warn us about it, and they certainly wouldn't do anything about it, because the only thing they can do about it is the opposite of what they're doing now, letting interest rates go up and shrinking their balance sheet, meaning selling U.S. Treasuries into the market and forcing interest rates higher and taking money out of circulation. Well, if they were to do that, we couldn't have any stimulus. In fact, we'd have to have sedatives. If the Federal Reserve did what was necessary to fight inflation, the government would have to cut spending right now, dramatically. Not only couldn't we have stimulus, they'd have to take away the stimulus that they already supplied. So it's sheer nonsense to believe that the Fed, has the ability or wherewithal. I mean, even if they have the tools to fight inflation, there's no way they're using them, because in the Fed's mind, the cure for inflation is worse than the disease. So we're going to get a whole hell of a lot of inflation. And I think it's a fatal disease. I think the Fed is mistaken if they think hyperinflation is worse than a recession or depression. It's not. Hyperinflation is the absolute worst outcome that the Fed should be trying to avoid at all costs. At this point, they just don't recognize that.
Thanks so much for being here and watching that video. And can I ask you to please subscribe to our channel so you can find out when we're posting new content. You'll be alerted right away when we do. To share this with people you think might benefit from the information, and certainly it helps us if you like the video. So if you like what you just saw, go ahead and hit that like button. And again, thank you so much for being here with me right now.